Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Now, I mentioned in last ep that I wanted to talk about generations, and you were like, oh, you mean blah, blah, blah? And I was like, no, not really, but this is what we're going to chat about. Because you have a whole other thing. Like, your mind went elsewhere when I said generations. And I was like, no, I literally want to talk about each generation and like what they've had to adapt to. So as a result, how they can sometimes act in general in the workforce.
It's actually very timely now we're talking about it because I, as everyone by now should know, am in Thailand. I really want to make sure everyone knows I'm at a beach. But when you come to whenever I've come back to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand recently, and actually probably to an extent Singapore in very different ways, all three quite different, you can see the switch in generations here really strongly as well. And I think there's a lot of it's like I'm just going to talk about Thailand now. Huge economic development, huge rise in tourism, and where this what is it, Gen Z, Gen Alpha's parents' generation may have been part of building that and spanned that economy that was really rough, but has now created wealth for their families. It's interesting even watching it in tourism, what people will and won't. Like kind of the service culture changes, the expectations of what your job is changes, and when a country has seen huge economic growth, I love watching that and seeing that suddenly it's not the same as you would expect it to be from I was here 20 years ago. So I think this is a really interesting conversation around the world, how different economies, factors, watching your parents, all of that stuff plays into how we behave very differently.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that you'll be noticing technology and that next generation in Thailand has really grabbed on to tech and taken what would have been their parents' generation's businesses and been able to scale them or to like I can imagine it's like even just tourism, the fact that they can grow these businesses on Airbnb now, for example, is fascinating and really driving that stuff. But yeah, I was just chatting with one of our male allies earlier today, and he was telling me how they were in a team meeting and they were discussing how to navigate restructuring the team. And there was a contingent in the room that was like, just suck it up. Like, you make these hard calls and people just have to deal. And then there are other people in the room that were like, we have to go about this very carefully and we need to worry about well being and we have to have it all set up and da da da. And I said, I'm kind of in this mode right now, given we're podcasting later, but by any chance were there generational differences with those views? And he said, now that you say that, absolutely. And I said, yeah. And we hear this. I think, don't they say there's 5 generations in the workforce right now? And there's this real clash. And I think, oh my gosh, the headlines, poor Gen Z, the headlines about Gen Z and how they're being fired and how they're this and how they're that. I thought it would just be worth uncovering, well, dealing with it head on and maybe why are there different behaviors and approaches to things in those generations, recognizing that we're generalizing for the sake of this conversation. But I just found that he was like, "Oh my gosh, light bulb moment." Like, of course. And we're
Who
seeing
was
the
the group?
headlines.
Which group was the one saying gently, gently, and which group was saying toughen up?
You guess.
Well, my assumption is sort of the Gen X millennials were saying toughen up, but my assumption there would also be that they have been through a few of these and kind of like it is just one of the cycle, whereas Gen Z quite rightly is going, this we've only just entered the workforce and one of the hardest times it has been to enter the workforce and now it feels even more uncertain. So
Yeah.
I wonder
Very
if their
close.
perspectives are
Very
quite
close,
different.
but it was Gen X and baby boomers v millennials.
Oh, yep. Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
No, because we're
which
also
is
the soft parents. We're soft parenting and
exactly.
we're soft working.
Exactly. And you know what I was thinking? I was like, "Why does this conversation matter?" And I was thinking that this is all about belonging, and we're always seeking to belong to something because it's where we find our identity. And I am really drawn to reels of Gen X women. Why? Because they talk about things that I'm navigating. They share similar values to I did, and I see these, there's 2 clips that I'm thinking about. I'm gonna try not to make this too long, but, one of the clips is about there was a millennial, that kind of said, you know, "What's wrong with Gen X?" or something like that. Granted, this is all, like, great for real fodder, isn't it? But, she just said, she had this, complete, what is it called? Diatribe? Where you do, like, one long is that what it's called? Diatribe? She just had this diatribe that everything she said, I was like, "Yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me." She was like, we were thrown onto the streets and we were not looked after and we had to find our own way home and we are in the days of the blah 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 and like all the stuff that you can imagine. But I identified with every single one of those because I was like, that was my upbringing. That was how I navigated this world. That is why I behave and judge others is because of that, we are part of this group and others aren't. And so it is a sense of identity. I'm going to break and not tell the other story. I'm going to tell that later when we get to that generation. But yeah, that I feel like that's an interesting thing. What generation do you identify with?
Well, I think I am technically a millennial, and I cling strongly to that because it shows me as being a little bit younger. But I am personally delighted that Gen Xers are finally coming to the hating on each other party because my understanding was that Gen Xers were sort of hiding away, accumulating wealth, and no one paying any attention to them while millennials and boomers were fighting each other.
No, do you know what? Gen X is the poorest generation, and there's,
Ah,
a
yeah.
lot of data. Yes, we are the poorest generation.
Are millennials rich?
No, 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 baby boomers are rich and everyone else, m was is poor. But no, Gen X, they often call us the forgotten generation and the ones that have it the worst, economically. And, yeah, so look, let's just go through each one, shall we? And then talk about like, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Here we go. Gen Z, da, 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 Gen Z,
Okay,
1997
so
to
Gen Z is
2012.
largely 1997 to 2012. Okay, that's
So
kind of
they're
the
in the
rough.
workforce. They're in the
And
workforce. We're
just for
not gonna
anyone who
cover
is looking at this like science, these are rough groupings that are completely arbitrary. Like there is no, it's just effectively, I think it's like social sciences, people who study these things, just put big loops around groups of people to go, are there any differences? So like you may have been born in 2013 and identify as Gen Z. All good. All good.
exactly, because I actually think you have a lot of Gen X, attributes, Nat, because as much as you love to, like, be young millennial, I'm like, "Well, you're really pushing it," but anyway.
I'm
Okay, so
actually very happy to be a Gen X as long as I look like a millennial and preferably a Gen Z.
I love it, I love it, I love it. Okay, so we've got this group that, just very quickly, Gen Alpha, which, they are not in the workforce yet, but what's interesting about that generation is they're digital natives, climate crisis is real, school hit really hard during COVID, so they've got, some pretty big social anxieties. These were groups of people that in formative years of high schools, have been in the house. Not only that, AI is a homework helper, so they are digital natives and adopters of AI to probably shortcut a lot of the work and problem solving and critical thinking that we had to go through. So that is going to be fascinating when they hit the workforce.
And so that
But
group
anyway,
is sort of 13 years or younger. So anyone we know who has teens or tweens, or my niece, I imagine. No. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. My niece, because Gen Alpha is still being born now, aren't they? Like you could still
yeah,
be
yeah, that's right. That's right.
that whole generation. Yeah. I mean, like that girl, she
Fascinating.
grew up knowing how to pose for a like she cocks a camera and she is like there for it in a way that I'm like, how did you
Instagram.
learn this? She would
Yeah, yeah,
take
yeah.
like cell phones off. Like I feel like a boomer because you like handle your phone to do something. She's like choo 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 choo, and suddenly you're like, how did you not have this functionality?
I think not only do I feel like a boomer just because I do, but equally my parents call me Karen all the time. But I mean my parents, my kids. My kids call me Karen all the time. Anyway, okay. So Gen Z, they entered the workforce. So we're fast forwarding here to Gen Z, who are entering the workforce, but they entered it during the pandemic. So they came into the workforce during COVID, right? So there would have been chaos there. Remember those formative years of needing to be around people when you first enter the workforce, but also not having a pandemic going on around you when you're trying to find your feet in a new environment. Student debt crisis, all time highs. housing affordability, forget it. That generation can't even see that happening. And one interesting thing here, Nat, mass layoffs all on TikTok. So these are people that are experiencing that people, and I've caught myself in these reels where people are like, oh, watch me get fired. And they literally record themselves
I
talking to
mean, they may
HR.
be fake. They may be fake.
They might be, but it's a thing, you know? Like it
Our
this
whole
is
generation's coming across, we're like, we believe everything we see on the internet.
I do, it's all true. But it is and we know that the tech absolutely slashed tens of thousands, I mean, hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost since COVID. So this generation was a part of that in real time. Pretty
So
interesting.
doing quick maths on this, people who were born in 20
1997 to
have you got a
2012.
hurricane happening behind you?
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. 1997 to 2012.
So I'm trying to think of that in age format. So that's 27-year-olds down to 13-year-olds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So,
about right.
which
The
actually
early
very delightful to find out that Kyla, my girlfriend, is in fact not Gen Z, which is really annoying because I can't mock her about it anymore. But she does have a lot more Gen Z traits than me.
what's it
So
where when was she born? When was she born?
94.
Oh,
She was
yeah.
like 10 years
Well,
later than me.
she's like you, tail end of a gen.
Yeah, she's at the
Mm,
opposite end
okay,
of the tail end.
okay.
Yeah, this group I think is really interesting 'cause so 13-year-olds are still working their way up into the workforce. But yeah, I do think imagine that arriving in and we'll talk a little bit soon about the parallels maybe with millennials arriving in the workforce at a time where there's major upheaval. And so the sense of you arrive and actually, it depends on where you land in this because there I think, you can be split between those who did arrive during the pandemic and they arrived with this sense of uncertainty, and then those who arrived later where there may be you'd hope that there's some, Gen Zers joining the workforce in, like, 3 years' time when we're on the up and up again.
Yeah,
And they'll
yeah.
have quite a different experience as well.
So
Yeah,
true.
this group is interesting because my
Well
understanding of sorry, go ahead.
mm. No, 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 go, go, go.
My understanding of this group is they they're realists in a way that we mistake sometime for being almost, soft or something, but they are realists about
Mm.
the economy is economic growth at all costs the right thing. Look at our planet. We're gonna be the ones inheriting it, and none of you people have done anything about it. Do I want to get a job and start at the bottom and work my way up like my parents or, um, aunties potentially because thinking about the generational ages did or why don't I just take control? It's almost like I want to take control and get what I want out of the system rather than assume that I have to bow down and be grateful for the scraps that I get. That kind of feels like the attitude that I see that kind of overrides this group a little bit.
Absolutely. Now imagine coming not from that generation and not understanding the context of what they've had to adapt to. Of course, it's perplexing and it comes off as weak or not resilient when really they're like, okay, so based on our maths here, working your ass off no longer guarantees security because swaths of people just get cut at whim. And that's the way it is. I think a huge percentage of them report having anxiety. In fact, almost half report feeling
Mm.
anxious or stressed all of the time because, I mean, all you have to do nowadays is turn on the TV. Now they've got 24/7 in their phones, shouting out at them about the instability of the world. And so as a result, I think what happens is they prioritize psychological safety and boundaries because it's like, oh my God, like I'm not losing my health over this because I see what y'all are doing, you know?
Well, and actually, that's it, like when we talk about resilience and anxiety, I think those two labels are incredibly subjective. Like talking about resilience, to me, it feels like our generations were taught or somehow ingrained this belief that the harder you work, the more burden you can shoulder, the more valuable you are. And I think we see that as resilience, whereas I think Gen Z see that as ridiculous. Like, why are you throwing yourself at this so much? For what? For some like shareholders somewhere that's not going to pay you back. So I think we see resilience quite differently. And I remember having this conversation with Kyla early on where I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, my worldview is shaped around the harder I work, the more it's my identity is tied to it in a way who's just completely isn't. So if we're using words like that, we can have very different views on them. And I think same with anxiety. I know a bunch of people now in their 40s, who are friends of mine, who felt deeply anxious as kids, and it just we didn't have labels for it, and actually even as adults. And it's just something that I feel like not only is it the economy and the surroundings, but I actually think each generation responds very strongly in the opposite direction to the role models they had growing up, because they see some of those behaviors and they see these really stressed out, depressed, angry people who don't deal with their emotions. And they're going flip hard the other way of, I'm going to actually talk about this stuff. And maybe it's too far another way, but I do feel like those things, when we talk about them, are often it's we're starting from a fundamentally different worldview, and it makes it really hard. Like, it makes it very easy to judge each other.
100%, which is why I thought this would be such an interesting just going, "Hey, has anyone thought about this as you're navigating your meetings?" Okay, let's chat because I know we did, and at Hatch, moving on to millennials, we hired tons of millennials, and I know you're at this group, Nat, but it's
I'm well
1981
and
to
truly in it, by the way.
1996.
1984. I was
You're
1984, so I was 3
1984.
years in. Not even on the edge.
Huh, huh. You are a millennial. But what's interesting is I recall hiring and I would describe it, I'd say I work with lots and lots of millennials, and they do have different values and desires, and what I noticed in the first interview of every single, interview that we had, when you get to, "Do you have any questions?" They would say, or no, we'd go, "Why do you wanna work here?" 2 things stood out. "Why do you wanna work here?" They would always lead with the mission and the purpose, and I was like, "Wow, this is really a generation that is drawn to us because of our brand, mission, and purpose." That was fascinating to me because that wasn't something for us, like, we'd work for tobacco companies, you know? And then the
I mean,
second thing
I,
that was
as a millennial, absolutely did not, and I refused. I actually got the opportunity to once to do some stuff for Playboy, and I was like, "No." My ethics. I was
So
very ethically driven.
this
I'm
is
such a millennial.
Okay, okay, okay. So millennials are purpose driven. So that was the first thing they wanted to align with the mission. And then they would ask two things. I remember they would go, "What is your culture like?" They really wanted to know how we behaved at work. That was really important to them. And when I looked into a few things shaping, I'll name a few things. You let me know your thoughts. First was they graduated into a recession. Global financial crisis. That would have been massive at the time, especially in the countries United States, where their parents were losing their homes, their pensions. They had uncles that became homeless. They had aunties that were out on the, that were had lost their jobs and all of their investments. So very scary time. It is also the first generation that graduated university with a massive debt. So now they've got a debt load coming out of education, first generation too, and but yet wages had shrunk relatively, so that to pay off that debt became increasingly difficult. So for this one, it's basically a financial stress generation. It's one that housing is can be out of reach. Big debt loads, low paying jobs, and seeing these boomers that have accumulated assets and cash. So pretty tricky.
Yeah, and I think this generation is probably in many ways, you may disagree because I haven't done any research into this, but my feeling is this generation is quite split. Like even in New Zealand, you see, and I had this conversation a while ago, and going to Auckland, and there are a bunch of people in their 40s who have these giant, beautiful houses. And for anyone who doesn't live in New Zealand, our property market is outrageous. Like, and actually, the rest of the world is sort of caught up, but there'd be like $2 to $5 million houses, easy. And I remember saying, "How do all these people have so much money?" And they said all their boomer parents did was buy a couple of properties really cheap back in the day, and they're all up at several $1 million, and suddenly their children benefit from that. And I feel like that is something, and obviously that's not everyone. So that split between the people, millennials who had boomer parents, and their just lives are easier as a result because they're so close to that generation who had affordable housing, had jobs for life, all of that stuff. And the group whose parents didn't make those same decisions, and they have all the downsides of that situation, which, yeah, I find really interesting to see as well.
I think you're spot on because that's the generation that this is, I think, where they go to the Gen X is overlooked because the wealthy boomers, that's going they call that the greatest wealth transfer in history, and that's all going to millennials in the next kind of 2 decades. Yeah, so go you. But what that was
I mean,
I
to be
found it
fair,
really
my parents
interesting.
weren't living in Auckland buying houses, so it's like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
helps.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. But, I just found that the purpose thing interesting given that when they graduated into the GFC and actually saw, there is no what was it? It's almost like financial means are out of reach. So they're like, "Well, if I'm not gonna, work for my house or whatever financial stability, I might as well do what I love." And the second thing I noticed was they asked about flexibility, and when we dug into for some of them, and I know I'm generalizing, it was because a lot had side hustles or portfolio careers. They had something else going on the side that was really common in that generation, which you would not have seen in other generations, and
And I
probably
think Gen
again
Z,
driven by yeah,
yeah,
purpose
Gen
and
Z's
financial
taken that
stability.
and run even further. I
Yeah.
wonder, I came into the workforce, I must have been couple of years in when the GFC hit and I was working in tech, so I was pretty insulated. But I do remember, and actually New Zealand was pretty insulated. So this global information is probably a lot of New Zealanders probably don't relate as strongly. And I say we were because the stats point to we were. I'm sure it felt very uncomfortable for a lot of people at the time, but we were not experiencing that same. Like I remember reading the news at the time with people jumping out of buildings in Wall Street. My friends over in the US were like, I'm just waiting for the next redundancy to hit. These massive corporations were crumbling, and we could see all that. But New Zealand, for the first time, or one of the times, was pretty less hit by it. So I think a lot of Kiwi probably felt the uncertainty. There was definitely some impacts, but not as bad as the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I imagine there wasn't the same anger with the fat cats because what happened during that period was executives got rich and the common person lost everything. So there's this real sense and I just wonder if that's why they're like, "I'm gonna have a portfolio career. There's no such thing as loyalty anymore, and I'm gonna do what I love." Like, there's really strong sense of, um, the world is unjust, therefore, this is what I'm driving for.
It'll be interesting. That's the one that I'm like, because I've experienced it slightly differently that almost we double down and when if I'm the best, hardest worker, I will be protected from some of these challenges. And now as we sort of get further into the workforce and further through our careers, burnout is really high. And I'm noticing a lot more people my age and above. That's when they start their portfolio careers, when they're just like, or they start opting out of corporate roles and we've seen this massive rise. I was having a conversation about it the other day of coaches and people just opting out and taking up coaching. And like we're obviously in this industry, so we're probably more attuned to that particular one. But a lot more solo business owners trying desperately to look for work or a style of working that works because the one that they've been in for the last 20 years has not served them. So I'm sure it's probably a split between those who went, "This is uncertain. I'm gonna make sure I've set myself up for success," and others who went, "I'm really gonna double down on this work hard and be valuable thing."
I think you're spot on. I think that's so true because that is my experience when I think about millennials as well and think about all of those that are in power suit that are as well. So I think you're spot on. Okay, we are going to move on to Gen X because we got 2 generations to
'Cause
go.
it's
And Gen X,
you.
yeah, it's me. 1965 to 1980. So I'm actually on the tail end of Gen X as well, actually. We are considered the latchkey generation in that our both parents worked, no supervision. I think for us, this is what this says is parents lost their lifetime jobs. So that was actually a real like no loyalty thing. We had an analog
So can
childhood
I ask, sorry, are your parents
yeah,
boomers or were they no, yeah, your parents must be
yes,
boomers
in
too.
that
Okay, so
correct,
my
but
parents were
but
boomers too, and
very,
I
very
wonder
early net because boomers are 46 and mine were 40, 44, 45. So mine are just out, just older.
slightly before. Is there a generation name for that group? Is that the
I I don't
because they were
know.
born effectively during World War II, right at the end, which is and the boomers are named boomers because there was a baby boom afterwards, but your parents would have been young enough to not be having babies at that time, so they
Greatest, it's
probably
called
would
the
have been
great oh, no, hang on.
oh, yeah,
It's
the
called the
great yeah,
silent no, no, silent generation is the predecessor to boomers. So that's what my folks are, and I didn't do any research, so I can't tell what that is,
No,
I'm
no, no,
afraid.
that's fine. No, it's just interesting because I think that kind of, I would imagine because people tended to have babies a lot younger. So your parents are similar age to mine. I think my dad was born in I actually wouldn't be shocked if he was born in no, he might have been 1949. So very similar age, but my parents didn't have me until mum was 32. So I think that's probably why we have a lot of similarities, that they were actually very similar age and so raised us in a similar way, but my parents just had babies a little bit later.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, well, back to me. I had, an analog childhood, as probably actually the tail end of millennials did as well, but I we had to adapt to tech in early and mid-career. So, I think because of our complete freedom, free childhoods, again, generalizing, and, having 2 parents that were working, we apparently have really adapted to pragmatic decision making more than any other generation. This is research, that Harvard
And
Business
Kristen's like,
Review
ours is
did.
just the best
Okay.
generation.
Yes, yes,
Who knew?
and we learned well, we have to, we need something. We learned leadership by watching what not to do. So that's kind of interesting, but I suppose you could say that about every generation, but, anyway, for us,
Well,
we're more likely
yes
to
and
stay in
no.
good enough jobs, I should say that, that's so true, like, we are more likely to stay in good enough jobs because there isn't that strong sense of purpose and, it's becoming more important, of course, but I'm talking about those grindy years.
I wonder this is probably the difference between start and end of each group because I feel like part of the reason millennials were probably really purpose driven is that they watched their parents, if they were older Gen X's, not have that be like, I'm just going to go to work and accept my lot. And I do think
Mm.
generations rebel against their parents. And so they went really hard the other way. Yeah, I think and then also the other one that I noticed in there is that latchkey kid. And I think we were pretty similar. Like we were out and about, we lived on an airbase, so we had what my memory is complete freedom, and now I'm in debates with mum and dad about how often they really did leave us at home for a weekend when I was, like, 10. Nah, they didn't leave us alone for a weekend, but I feel like it was o often quite a long time during the day. Um, I think what happened there as well is there's a split. People like me had, like, an a delightful childhood. Like, I don't remember anything bad happening, whereas I do know a lot of my friends, as a result of that kind of complete freedom, like, got into some pickles and got into some, like, situations that were far beyond what they should have been in as a child, and I think that's what's led to them parenting their kids a lot more, closely because they actually know what the world can look like if you have, 10-year-olds racing around on the street and, that whole stranger danger, that whole, thing picked up because I think there was a real mix and in that kind of we glamorize or romanticize that idea of latchkey because for a lot of us, it was lovely, but for some, and actually probably an equal amount, it was not good.
I could not agree more. I totally think you're spot on because last week's podcast, I don't know what I can't even remember menopause brain what we were chatting about, but it was like I was like, who are parenting all these who are all these helicopter parents? Sure enough, it is a lot of Gen Xers because they again were like so free range that they are way more in control of their children for that reason. So, yep, absolutely. Love that. Okay, we are gonna move on to the last generation unless you oh, no, I'm gonna tell my story quickly. Have you seen The Menopause Army? Have you seen Menopause Army by
Is
that
that the
Brent
one you send
comedian
me
Brenda
sometimes?
B?
That lady who's like, "We're doing the next meeting of the menopause group," and then she goes through a checklist.
She was great. "We are the do not care we are the do not care committee, and we are" and she's like,
Just as a tangent, you send me menopause reels. Kyla sends me reels of her crushes. She's got 2 crushes. One is Robert Irwin. And one
"Oh
is
my
this
god."
guy who reads books in, like, a tractor. She is, like, so overt about her crushes, and I'm like, "I have to support
I
these."
love
It's
it.
funny what different people send you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna find Brenda B and show it to you, but it's this, Gen X, like, strong woman, big glasses, chewing this big, this wad of gum in her mouth, and she's like, "I heard that they're, recruiting young girls, to the army," and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember everything, but she was like, I don't know why the young girls got stuff to do, they got babies to have, they got lives to live, they got interesting things to do. There's a whole generation of women, Gen X, just waiting to be called up to the army, and she pauses for effect, and she's just
Oh,
like
I have
she's
seen that
you
one.
know yeah, yeah, "We are so angry, just give us a gun, just put us into battle," and she's like, "We got minivans, we could carpool." She's just like she's like, "We're angry at our husbands most of the time. Just give us a weapon," and she's like, "I don't know why you're bugging these young people." Anyway, it's very good. It's very good. I was like, "Yeah, that's so us. I love it." Put us into battle. Actually, we're too tired. We'll be like, "Ah, we're
I was
too
gonna say
tired."
there is a bit of tiredness, but then maybe the battles would be a lot nicer because everyone would be like, "Let's just." I mean, we've long since wondered what would happen if women were in charge of making these decisions, and I
Oh.
suspect one of them is like, "Let's just not.
Okay, well,
Let's
obviously,
just
we're
go have a
wrapping
glass
up.
of
We
rosé instead."
I know. We've gone a little bit over today, so thanks for bearing with everyone while we get to our last gen, which we don't have to say a lot, of the boomers. 46 to 64, entered the workforce when, you could live off of a single income. I think above I was seeing the stats of it said that, um, millennials, millennials own 4.6 of US wealth. It's just interesting comparison. At the same age, boomers owned 21%. So it just goes to show that the boomers had financial abundance and were able to live with one parent at home, which is quite interesting. Promotions were tied to tenure. So you just climbed that ladder and you got to the CEO position, even if maybe you weren't the best, it feels like. But what's interesting with them though, actually, is we are struggling. We, as in like the other generations, are struggling to push them out of the workforce and retire because they are living longer than expected. Therefore, they are also stressed about finances. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm really delighted that we all suddenly started living longer personally, because I feel like it was about time. I didn't wanna die in my 40s like, as a
But
what
it
is it,
makes it
medieval
makes for
parent.
it's interesting though, because it does really make for promotions and upward mobility tricky for people coming in.
Well, yes, and I do think that there is probably a little key in there, because I was doing our updated impact report, and I think we've probably got about Mm, I think we've maybe got 5 or 10 people who would be baby boomers in power suit. So, we have we don't have any silent generation, but we've got a group, which is really cool. I was like, we span basically every generation, which
Yeah, that's
when you talk
cool.
about diversity, it's really great to cross, collaborate,
100.
and yeah, it's lovely. Um, I wonder again if that points to a split. We've got people, and I'd include my parents in this, who invested well. They did buy and sell some properties. They set themselves up for a nice retirement. They were part of great superannuation plans that pay out a regular amount every month or week or whatever, and they can live comfortably for the rest of their lives and retire at 60, 65, and it really doesn't matter from there on in. And then I think there's probably another group who that wasn't true for, and I think it's probably the case in every generation, that they maybe didn't have the same opportunities to start. They and we say you tenure, you get to CEO, but really once you get to the top of the pyramid, there are fewer and fewer roles. So there will always be people who didn't make it to those positions. And yeah, so I wonder if this generation in many ways has the biggest discrepancy, because there
I
is
wonder.
yeah, because there was so much
Haves
more.
and have-nots.
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah,
maybe, because,
yeah.
like,
I
yeah,
think I
if
think
you look at kind of the
intergenerationally, Nat, you're spot on. I totally agree with you. The wealth would not have been distributed within a given generation, whereas millennials, you'd say it's smaller than that
no one
split. So
really
yeah,
knows.
spot on. Yeah.
Although we're getting it from the boomers, so that's a
Yeah,
good
you're about
tip
to get
from
it from
me.
the boomers, so you'll be right, you'll be right. No, amazing. Well, we are really the point of this conversation was, and any final thoughts, Nat, are very welcomed on our Power Up podcast. No, I think that the point of today was to go, it's so interesting that we're pitting, there are definitely different behaviors that we bring to a meeting, as simple as that. Different behaviors we bring to a meeting because we are adapted and had to adapt to very different times. Just think of what's happened over the last, 100 years, economically, socially, culturally, climate-wise, geopolitically, you name it. And so you adapt to your environment. And I just think it's interesting to recognize that the next
Yeah,
time you're in a
and I
meeting, the
like
next
that.
time you're in conversation. Mm.
Yeah, I really I really like that way of looking at it because I think sometimes we take an approach, I don't mean you and I, but the world of like, and then just miraculously boomers behave like this. And I think what you're saying here, which I totally agree with, is that we're all behaving logically, but to very different starting points and worldviews and experiences. So, like rolling right back to that meeting you mentioned at the start, when you're sitting in that meeting hearing about redundancies, whatever your life looked like, you are going to respond very differently in that situation. And if you are more Gen X and Boomer, and you're like, I've been around the block a few times, I was out on my own when I was 5 wandering the streets, like, you might behave quite differently than someone who has had helicopter parenting, who has seen the impacts of no one tackling climate change and not really having so much faith in the system, and then we can go, "Oh, not resilient," or, "Oh, too emotional," and actually it's just both very logical reactions, and I think if we start thinking of each other with empathy like that, and starting to understand why we behave like we do, we'll have a much better time together.
Yeah, share our podcast with all of your office everyone because we'd love to hear what you think and just get some different perspectives. If you are in a multi-generational office, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and hopefully that was helpful. And check out powersuit.com because we are
I
also for
enjoyed
all
it.
generations.
I really enjoyed it. We are, and I'm really delighted by it. Actually, do you know what? A couple of fun facts about Powersuit where as we wrap up, because I've just, started doing just the demographic stuff. Just a quick look. I'm gonna read out.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
already well over, so why not YOLO it? So we have current well, over the life of Powersuit, which is still pretty new, so we have probably about 7, 8% self-employed now. Similar percentage are currently looking for work, with a slightly half of that on a career break. So there's quite a mix there outside. So basically, we've probably got about 80% in part or full-time work, but everyone else is in these different situations. I don't think we had so many people looking for work this time last year. So that's becoming a significant. And one of the things I've noticed with both people taking career breaks and looking for work is we obviously look after people during that situation. We often reduce the membership fees because it can be really comforting to keep your foot in the door, meeting people, easy way to network. So I really like seeing that. Um, the other one I found really interesting is career stage. So individual contributors, and that could be up to senior individual contributors, are about half. Managers are about almost a quarter, and then senior managers a reasonable group too. But we've got quite a few executives as well. Probably, I'm going to say about 7, 8% executives. And I've gone through the age thing. Yeah, but I just thought that was just some really interesting things, and it was nice to see the number of fleegs in our list of places around the world, with some more arriving from Singapore and Malaysia, and about 10, 15 members in the UK. And Kyla said last night, gosh, they're signing up even though you're not really targeting the UK. So, yeah, that's quite interesting to see a cohort.
I
So I'm
didn't
going
know
to
we had
organize
10
a catch
because
up
I've
for our
tried.
UK crowd.
Yeah, do, 'cause I think that's important because I was chatting with a joiner last week who I was like, "Oh, I just couldn't remember all the names of the UK people." So yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, I think
Amazing.
that'll be
So
nice.
join us everyone. We'd love for you to click that become a member button today, and then we get to chat about all sorts of interesting stuff. Yeah, amazing.
Like this, like
That
the
was
generations. Although I actually heard from someone yesterday and she was like, I'm just listening to your podcast on names. I feel like you know when people listen because it becomes a little bit of a like, oh,
Yeah.
I hope I got your name right.
I know. They think we're, like, gonna come down on them. Okay, powersuit.com, everyone. No, really, it is, we are professional development designed specifically for busy people, and so just as you've got us popped in your ears on your walk or your whatever, you can do the same thing with more how-tos and tools inside, Powersuit, so come and join us, and we will catch you all next time. Bye.
Bye.